Good afternoon, and welcome to the second in the series of virtual roundtable webinars for the Placement Exchange. As we continue to draw closer to the on-site experience in Indianapolis in March 2016, TPE will offer 11 such sessions in total. If you have a colleague who is unable to join us today, please share with them the session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the Placement Exchange YouTube channel. Before we begin, just some general housekeeping. We please ask that all attendees mute their microphones and to help us avoid background noise and ambient noise. We have prepared questions for the panelists to respond to, but encourage attendees to also submit questions, and you can do so through the chat function on the dashboard, which can be found down at the bottom here. I've already taken mine to the outside, but you can submit questions there. If you should have questions after we conclude today's session, please feel free to contact TPE or the panelists, and we will do our very best to assist you. If you hear something that you like and would like to share, of course, we encourage that folks can please feel free to live tweet and use hashtag TPE2016 so that can be shared throughout your networks and help share the good news and the good words that are shared today. We'll begin, and just as a brief introduction for myself, I'm going to first move this out of the way. My name is Chris MacDonald. I am the co-chair for Education and Resources for TPE 2016. I will serve as the moderator for this webinar, and I currently serve as the Executive Director for University Housing at Georgia Southern University. And we'll go ahead and ask the panelists to introduce themselves.
So we're starting with myself, Eric Newble. I am currently the Associate Vice Chancellor in charge of student involvement and leadership at East Carolina University. That essentially means that the areas of student centers, Greek life, student activities, LGBT, resource center, cultural center, trying to remember what other areas, finance, student government, those areas, basically all of student life ends up reporting to me. And then my brief background is coming up through student activities and student centers, and then also a short stint, a relatively short stint for about 6-7 years as the Dean of Students, and working at both medium and small public schools, now at a large public school.
Hi, I'm Tina Powelson. I'm the next panelist currently I'm at the University of Houston. I'm the director for the Center for Student Involvement here, which oversees student organizations, major campus programming and traditions, leadership, and civic engagement opportunities as well. I've been at University of Houston for less than a year, and have been at several institutions prior to that, from a small private to a large urban to a mid-sized residential campus as well. So varying experiences where I've really just grown up kind of through student activities throughout my career to get me to the point where I'm at now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anne-Marie Seifert, and I primarily started my career working in student center operations, student activities, and leadership. I'm currently the Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Engagement at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where I've been for 4 years. And I oversee a portfolio of programs that make up a student engagement cluster. So some of the examples are student activities, leadership, community engagement, student governance, fraternities and sororities, student media, arts programs, educational policy and advocacy, and student businesses. I primarily have been at large public institutions with a research focus. In the past, I've also had oversight for multicultural student services, women's programs, student legal services, career services, campus recreation, cultural centers, LGBTQA centers, and student center operations. Excited to be here with you today.
Thank you all, the three of our learned colleagues, for joining us today and sharing their thoughts on stay or to go, considering the different things that you need to think about when you make the decision of whether or not the current position that you're in has run its course and you're ready to move on, or if there's a new opportunity that you should be looking into. We do have some prepared questions, and the first question for us today is, what has your experience been at making the decision to stay or go during your own career?
So for myself, and this is Eric, I've worked at 6 different institutions during my 20 years in student affairs, and I think that the one thing that has really stood out for me is that the decision seems to be different every time I go to leave an institution. Sometimes it's the opportunities that are out there and the want to move up and explore new things. Sometimes it's the family issues that come into play, whether it's extended family or direct family, children, wife, partners, and sometimes it's been as varied as just the experience. As we all know, an institution sometimes will change depending on the leadership of the institution. So the institutional mission or the values of the institution might have changed slightly, which led to wanting to look in different directions. I think the one thing that held true for me in my career is trying to be sure that I'm making the decision to stay or to go based on what I want and not what others want. And I know that sounds really simple to say, but many times, you have so many influencers from your students, but also your administration to family, friends, colleagues of the schools, especially when other positions open up and you start presenting more and you're out in the field more. You will get a lot of very enticing offers, and people will say, "Oh, you should come here." And it's really attractive and really hard to turn those things down. But it's important to make that decision for yourself, for what's right for you at that time, and not necessarily to be caught up in the emotional moment.
I think, Eric, this is Tina. Eric, you're exactly right. I think you have to, in the case of making a decision of whether to stay or go, you've really got to evaluate your own personal priorities and what's really important to you in that moment. So I've had to leave several institutions. This is actually the 5th institution that I've worked at or been a part of, and just like Eric, has been for a different reason every time. And so, and if you look back on those reasons, you'll realize it's probably pretty reflective of where you are in life at that point. So it could be family. It could be one time I was finishing up my doctorate and I was ready to move on to my next position and that next step up. And so it's all for different reasons. But I think as you go through it, you've got to realize what's important to you. Where are those balance of wants and needs for you in life at that point?
I definitely agree with what's been said so far, and I also, don't believe that there's a standard formula, even from different transition to transition. So I definitely echo the comment that Tina made about it being where you are at a certain point in your life or your career. For me, I've transitioned, or really my decisions to stay or go have surrounded the possibility of a new experience or a new adventure, a new opportunity, advancement, and then this last time was about being closer to family. So I totally concur that it's a very personal process. I always try to be intentional, but also keep a very open mind. I've always tried to have plans when possible, but be willing to take calculated risks or seize an opportunity. I probably wouldn't be at the institution I'm at currently because I wasn't necessarily looking to leave my institution. But once 4 people forwarded me the same job description, I thought, okay, universe, I'm going to listen to this. And so I encourage folks to get advice and perspectives from others, but understand that where your situations are similar and different. Sometimes I hear folks, getting advice and then they feel confused, and it's something as simple as they're single and the advice giver has a family. So they might be thinking about very different things. And then I think it's also important, and I try to be very cognizant of my privilege in the given situation and any potential limitations I might have, So some of the things that I try to think about and I try to encourage colleagues and friends to think about is, are we the primary financial supporter for ourselves or others? Do we have to stay in a certain region to care for an aging parent or an ill family member? And so thinking about, what your life currently is and what those decisions look like, and feeling like you're making a decision that is authentically for you and your experience.
Thank you. Wonderful answers, very thoughtful. The next question, how should or how do professionals review their successes, challenges, and potential opportunities?
I think first and foremost is you've got to be really clear on who you are as a professional. What are your own personal philosophies in student affairs and in the work that you do? What are the values that you hold true personally and in the workplace? What are some of those best practices in maybe the functional area that you work in or in higher education? And then really be able to compare your experience. Do a really hard look on if this is what I say is really important to me, these are the things that I'm aspiring to achieve in my career, these are the goals that I'm setting. I think first and foremost to be able to review kind of where you are in your current position is to do just a really honest comparison of the two and making sure you feel like you're gaining the experience that you need. I think there is some advice that I would probably give as you do this is that there is no picture-perfect job. There is no picture-perfect institution or environment that you can work in. Every place has its really great positive aspects and then other challenges that are going to present themselves. So if you're looking for that, you may be searching for a very long time. But as you go through this, have this really good understanding of what you're willing to compromise in or be flexible on or learn from as an experience versus the challenge of being true to yourself. And not having to give up who you feel you are professionally. So I'd say those are, at least from my advice, of good first steps. And as you start to review your successes, challenges, and potential opportunities, is really being thorough with that experience and kind of just identifying the gaps that you've either created in your experience or you've found in your experience that you want to fill in other ways.
Tina really covered a lot there. Yeah, I definitely agree that knowing who you are is so important. And I think in regards to that, also trusting your instincts and understanding why you feel or think the way you do about something is important. I absolutely also agree there's no picture-perfect organization, but organization fit is also important. So think about the things that are important to you. Is connecting with the values of the institution is important? Is a leadership and philosophical approach that aligns with your approach to your work important? I think as you're reviewing successes, challenges, and potential opportunities, you also need to be honest with yourself about your performance, your approach to your work, your willingness to be a good team player and partner. How have you contributed to or detracted from organizational advancements in your team, cohesion, campus collaborations, building partnerships, or reaching institutional goals? For me, it's always been important to be intentional, to have a clear understanding about long and short-term goals, and to review those and challenge myself to think about, how those fit in to my expectations of my work. Have you asked for expanded responsibility in your current role? And then probably one of the last things I'll say on this is, have you thought about utilizing organizational tools to consider your career plan or to evaluate success, challenges, and opportunities? For example, something I do often is, the SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges that we do with our organization. You can also utilize that as a career planning and personal evaluation tool. So something to consider.
So while I agree with everyone that there is no, I always called it far, far away from Shrek, there is no far, far away perfect institution. I have a lot of open positions. Working for me is wonderful. One of the things I think that jumps out, because everybody has said exactly things that are on point, is that when you start to look at the other institutions too, I think because we are sometimes looking for the different grass or being the grass greener on the other side, we tend to look, and I'm seeing a lot of professionals tend to look a lot at the school itself and the mission, which is wonderful, and not do enough research on the leadership of the school, from the president or chancellor down to the vice president, down to your direct supervisor, really looking at and doing some background checks on those individuals, finding out, you know, what are they like, what are their strengths, how have they approached their career, you know, what individuals have worked for them. The great thing about our profession is that it is fairly small and tight knit, so we can always find somebody that knows somebody. And I think doing that research is important. And now I say that, and the flip side of that, which I've experienced a number of times already with staff, is never go to a job for a person. I don't find that people are overly complete or satisfied when they go to a job just for an individual or because they want to work for a certain person or with a certain person. Partially because people leave, as we're talking about now. And then when people leave, the dynamic of the organization is going to change naturally, but specifically if you went there for that individual, you find that, you know, that all of a sudden now you're looking at the school through a whole new light, and maybe the location, the city, the town, the institution, the mission is not what you want it to be, but you overlooked that because you wanted to work for an individual. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but that's important. So do your research on the people that you're going to work for and with, but also never move just for an individual because individuals change.
Fantastic and very thorough responses. Thank you all. I would also offer kind of as a summary from what I've heard from the respondents is that this needs to be a meticulous exercise and to be done so with almost a sense of dispassion where you need to be very pointed and to borrow Anne-Marie's comment, very intentional in what your approach is and not to do it for any singular piece because after that honeymoon period, that program might change, that person might leave. Try to hit as many pieces as you possibly can. The next question, how do you know if you have outgrown your current position?
I think to know if you've outgrown your current position, you have to really know what it is you were hoping to gain in the first place. So I think my advice is to really determine your own growth. So determine what it is that you're hoping to gain, what it is that what experiences you're looking for. Anne-Marie alluded to that in her last response. Is seeking out those experiences that you want to gain. Don't let your experience create you. You go out and create your experience. So no matter what your situation is on your campus, no matter what challenges you're facing, it's yours to create. There's always something to learn. There's always something to gain, something to take away. Even when I look at the positions that I've had that have been a little bit more challenging in my career, I can definitely say X, Y, and Z that I have learned from that position. So I think use what others do to complement your experience, to help you cultivate some good experiences, but ultimately it's for you to determine your own success. So how do you know if you've outgrown your current position? I think once you've gotten to that place where you feel like you have been able to create your experience and kind of own that, I would really just understand if you're being challenged or not. At least for me, when I feel like I've outgrown a position I was in, I felt like I had taken my position to as far as it could go, and it really needed a fresh perspective. And that was me having to be honest with myself of saying, you know what, I don't know if I can do anything more. Someone new may need to take this to the next level. I may need a new experience and a new challenge because it wasn't that for me anymore. So that is putting yourself in a place of vulnerability a little bit and to get to a point where you have to be able to let go as well. So that would be my advice.
I think whenever possible, talk early with your supervisor about your current role and your goals to advance your experience and position you for success in your current role and beyond. I think those conversations can not only be great in regards to framing expectations, but they can be a really great check-in, which I think can give you insight into your current position. The other thing is, from my perspective, student affairs is constantly changing, and we need to position ourselves and our organizations to be as agile as possible. So I always try to think globally about my role and talk with my staff about their positions. You know, are you thinking globally, or are you thinking too narrowly about your current role? What impact are you having? If you left your job today, what would be your legacy? Compare your situation to where you have been and what you've accomplished. Other people's achievements shouldn't be a signal for your path or tool for, it should be a signal for your path and tool for reflection. Understand your own intention for comparing yourself to others and the possibility that your situation is very different. I bring this up because I feel like the calls that I get from colleagues and friends are often about, you know, someone got a job at another institution, someone that they started with, or a colleague, or someone that was in a graduate program, and it, you know, makes them think about their own role and their own progress. And I would just challenge our thinking about, you know, what our specific intention is for comparing ourselves to others. And then I think there's some things that we can do, document our progresses and our achievements on our resume. I think it's a good exercise that it can allow for reflection and collaboration, and celebration. It's something that I encourage my folks to do every year as almost, you know, a process of considering what the past year has been. Reevaluate professional goals at minimum annually, and I think we should share those goals broadly. I definitely always want to know where my colleagues would like to go so that I can help position them for success. And then you're going to hear me say it a lot during our discussion today, but trust your instincts and trust yourself, and have a feeling and an understanding about, you know, when you've outgrown your position.
I can't agree with Anne-Marie more. It's a gut feeling. You know, we talk about trust a lot, and you do a lot of things, relationship building, to gain trust and around people and different activities you do, but ultimately trust becomes a feeling, an emotion, gut sense. And I think that's the same for when you're talking about outgrowing. And I also think about outgrowing a position as more than just the work that's done in the position. You know, so as we've already talked about earlier, we've all mentioned there are so many factors in moving to different positions. One of those might be the position and the duties, but another one might be where you are in your career academically in terms of your different degrees that you're going after, where you want to live based on dealing with your partner, family, that kind of stuff, and that all plays into outgrowing a position. I know that for me, I rate very high in Strengths Quest on strategy, and I try to think strategically coming into a new position of, you know, how long do I expect to be here before I start to question. And as much as I want to believe that when I come into a job that I don't want to think about the end point, I tend to always think about the end point in mind. And that doesn't mean that that end point comes and I'm ready to leave, but that end point, as it starts to come closer, I start to, as Anne-Marie has talked about, reevaluate my career goals, where I am with my family, personal life, what I'm doing professionally with NASPA, or if I'm presenting or writing different things, where my interests might lie, especially as our profession changes. And I think, but it helps, that timeline that I set for myself early on helps me to think about that. I also say talk about it as much as possible. The worst thing you can do is just feel like you're on an island like this and you're alone. If you can, I know that's another question coming up, talk about it with your supervisor. I know that that's a great opportunity for me with colleagues and staff also that I report to, my supervisor, but also people that report to me. Always leading a conversation with, so where do you want to be? How long are you looking for? What's your next step? You know, what are you hoping to get to? And that helps, I think, to map out a plan that's not going to be a permanent map or a permanent plan, but like any plan is going to have detours or you're going to change halfway through, but at least there's a plan. And I think that's really helped me to kind of at least keep a target goal of where I'm going, where I want to get to, what's going on, and as things change in my life, that I can adjust, but that still points me in the direction that I was trying to get.
Thank you all for your answers. One thing I would also offer is that if you feel like you've outgrown your position and you feel like you've developed such a strong sense of competence in what you're currently doing, there's always an opportunity to ask to do more. Asking a supervisor if there's some additional responsibilities, if there's some organizational change that might be forthcoming that you could fall very strongly in line with, there can be some real opportunity there if all other things are still hitting on all cylinders, whether, with the location, institution, and some of those other pieces. If it's just the scope of your position and the scope of your vocational output, there might be an opportunity for you to do some additional things on campus. Sometimes it just takes you asking. Our fifth question, what advice do you give to professionals who feel they are ready to go but are unsure about how to communicate this to their employer?
Yeah, this can definitely be challenging. I think be as transparent as possible. Understand your current environment and situation, and that should inform how you approach and engage your employer. If you're leaving under challenging circumstances, talk it through with a couple of trusted colleagues, mentors, or friends to position yourself to evaluate your situation in the most sensible way possible. I think it's good to be open to negotiating your exit and positioning your current and future organization for success. You may not have any specific obligations, but small adjustments may have a big impact. For example, something like agreeing to leave at the end of a semester rather than in the middle of a semester. When I've approached former supervisors about leaving, I've thought carefully about what details and feedback would be of value to the organization, and I've utilized that framework to guide my conversations, whether it's the initial conversation with the supervisor or any of my exit conversations. And then the last piece, which will really lead into the next question we'll talk about, is put in effort to leave on good terms. I think that's extremely important.
I agree too, is that no matter how difficult your situation might be with your employer, and sometimes it is, you can go out with a lot of class and dignity. And that's leaving that organization in as good a place as possible, and really kind of, they talk about overachieving when you leave, whether that's creating manuals, meeting people, setting up meetings even with your employer or your supervisor, even if not asked, to let them know, particularly when you're leaving that on terms that might not be ideal. Another piece that I always think about is I try to put myself in the place of the employer. So when I've been the supervisor and the staff tells me they're leaving, I want to make sure I'm supportive. But at the same time, as nature of our jobs, we start thinking of as the next plan. Like, okay, when would I do a search? How would I handle this? How would we support this within the organization? How would we be able to get by when this person leaves? So realize that, be honest with your search. There are a lot of people that start a search and they're not really committed to the search yet. They're kind of putting out feelers, as people say. And there are also times when you're in the middle of a search with an institution where you really are not 100% sure that you want that position, but you want to test the waters. You won't know until you go. You want to make sure you get some more practice in phone interviews, that kind of thing. So I think that all plays in for me when you start sharing with your employer. I like to share with my employer when I'm truly serious and when I've also progressed, at a certain stage. And every stage is different, within a search. If the search is a real search, if there's internal, if it's very preliminary, like they're just doing a phone interview and there's going to be 3 more stages. I don't necessarily tell my employer or expect my staff to tell me right away at that point. But at the same point, a lot of that is dependent on the relationship you have with your supervisor and your employer. But knowing that if you put yourself in their shoes, what are the next things that they're going to have to think about and realize? So make sure that what you're doing is real. The last thing I would say is I would, and you hear about it more and more in our profession, don't play the leaving card to get a better position at your institution. If you are really ready to leave, then leave. And we've all been in those positions where we've left and somebody has said, well, what can I do to keep you here? Or what if we did this? And then you quickly come out and say, it's not about that. I'm ready for this reason or that reason. So I think that's being fair and honest with the institution and the employer.
I think everything that's shared has been excellent. I don't have a whole lot more to add that hasn't been shared already. I think the only thing I would reinforce is that you know your context best. You know your institution best and the department you work in and the people you work with. So really just making a good decision based on that. Unfortunately, some of you may be in situations where there may be repercussions to letting people know that you're leaving, or you may be treated differently if people know that you're leaving, you may be considered, if you will, a lame duck in some ways if people know you're leaving. So I think those are all some realities that you face out there. So really doing your best to kind of respect the processes that are there, knowing that the posting process and hiring all takes a while, and try to do your best to leave, as Anne Marie and Eric have shared, in a dignified and respectful way as much as you can. So the other piece of advice that you've already heard from all of us is you do need to take care of yourself. I think there's a balance in all of that as you go through this process, and it's good to share stories of what we've experienced and what we've been able to do, but really you know your own situation. So at one time I knew that I was absolutely going, so I was very okay with letting people know that I was leaving, and they were able to start the process while I was still employed, because I was very okay with letting people know that this was my plan. And other times I waited till I got to a campus interview before I shared that I was planning on leaving, because I wanted to make sure that I was in a position where I felt more comfortable sharing that, because I thought that it would be a little bit better in my work environment if I waited a little bit longer. So it really just depends on where you are and your comfort level, and doing your best to leave on a positive note.
Thank you all. Very sage advice. Definitely one of the more pensive moments when you communicate with your supervisor. That kind of playing off of what each of you have said, I will also offer to our attendants that when you share with your employer that you're leaving, it might be a little tense, but don't fret too much. They're supervisors, and they've had people tell them they're leaving before. And so although we'd never like to see good people leave, and we'll get over the first little bit of shock maybe, the reality is that, much like Eric said, we'll start thinking about, okay, what is our next process? That doesn't mean we'll be ready to put you off and not participate with you as you continue the process, and also leading up to your departure. But don't stress too much. It's not our first rodeo. Not to make it sound trite or anything like that. If I do leave, what suggestions do you have to leave well, and what do you maybe define as leaving well?
Sure. I think the first thing to remember is, as big as the field is, it's also very small, and people talk, and not only about what you do in your finest moments, but also about what happens in those more challenging moments. So leave with integrity and complete your last days the same way you contributed to the institution during your tenure. In regards to the formal process, I've always informed my supervisor in person and then followed up in writing. I've always tried to tell folks as early as possible. definitely suggest to treat leaving like another project. Organize it, be intentional, be helpful. Also, on the personal side, decide what's important to you and take steps to honor that. So for example, for me, relationships are extremely important. So I've always decided who I wanted to communicate with before an official announcement is made, and I've negotiated that with my supervisor. Let them know that, you know, I would like a day or 2 days to be able to, you know, talk to folks because those relationships are important to me. I also ask my current supervisor about expectations. It's great to be clear about what they would like you to accomplish in, you know, the remaining time you have at the institution. I always try to strategize with direct reports about how to best position them for success after my departure. And I try not to forget to find, you know, ways to say goodbye. This may seem really simple, but if your institution doesn't provide a formal opportunity for you to say goodbye to colleagues, create your own way to say goodbye with the people that you care about. I mean, big parties can definitely, at least from my perspective, be a little emotionally draining, but I've found it really important to the transition process, not only for me, but for the colleagues that I'm leaving. And those are people that I still care about. And so it's not like I'm just leaving an institution that I'm like, peace, you know, and I never talk to anybody again. And then the other thing I would just say to wrap up is to stick to your exit plan. It may be tempting to still stay involved with your former campus, but step back and allow your replacement to make their own mark. I've always received calls from former colleagues, but have been very cautious about my intentions. I've tried to shift my relationship with them to a mentor, a friend, an empathetic listener, but not put myself in a position where I'm criticizing the institution or decisions made by my successor.
I agree. I think I like to plan how I leave with how I came into the job. So when I come into a position, I start thinking about, okay, let me set up meetings with people. Let me try to learn. Let me share and build coalitions. Let me share my opinion. Let me get to know the campus. Let me make it around, talk to people. And I do the same thing. I basically almost literally look at the list of organizations, areas, people that I tried to meet with in my first couple of months on the job, and I try to go through that on the reverse end. It helps to realize that when you do leave, as we all know, our field does not move at lightning speed. So when we do leave, it could be a semester, it could be a year before that position is filled sometimes. And so that means all those individuals around you that you worked with, which is why you went and met with them in the first place coming in, are going to have to pick up the slack and contribute in ways that were different than their normal job. So meeting with them to talk about what's going on, leaving, all the things happening. It sounds really silly too, but I also try to think of what is it like being the new person coming in. So I will go so far, and it sounds really, really silly, but I will take my label gun and I will label every drawer in the office as to where things are. It's amazing, not just files, but it's amazing on what you collect. Like, here's the bullhorn for emergencies. Here is this. Here is the stack of files. Here is the videos. And it's not labeling tons, but you label enough that I've heard from individuals that have come in after me and said, you know, it was great. I walked in the office and there was a label about where things were. And that was literally trying to put myself in their position when I'm coming into the office. What do I wish that individual had left for me? And then I agree 100% with Anne-Marie that there is not a position that I've left that you've not gotten phone calls afterwards. And it's so hard to not have emotions when the things that you basically poured everything you had into are going in different directions. Not necessarily bad directions. They're just different because there's a new person that's in there and has a different idea and has different goals. And it's important to really kind of emotionally step away from it and just be there for support for those individuals calling, and just to let them know that what it was like when you came in is that you're learning, you're trying, they have great intentions, they've gone through a long process, they've helped select this person. I'm sure they're a fantastic person. you give them the same time and respect that they gave you, even if sometimes they didn't give you that time and respect when you started the job. But tell them that, and I think that definitely helps with the transition.
Perfect. I don't know if I have a whole lot more to share. You guys covered a lot, but I would just say is just be your best you. I mean, that's what you want to be remembered by. And as I think Anne-Marie mentioned that earlier. What do you want your legacy to be? What do you want those parting words to be? Those lasting impressions to be? Because sometimes your last impression is the one people remember the most. So leave respectfully, and remember that student affairs is a small world. You're surprised on who is connected to who and who you may be interviewing with next that may know someone who is at the institution you're at now. So it is a small world out there. So don't forget that everything you think, say, and do is always a reflection on your own character. So that's important to remember. The other thing I would say is to transition as much of your knowledge as possible. One of the things I always believe in when I leave a position is that I want someone else to be able to pick up exactly where I left off if they chose to go the same direction. Obviously, as Eric said, it may be a completely different direction, but I want to do my best to transfer as much of that knowledge and information as possible, whether that's through transition documents or electronic files on a shared drive or a Google Drive or whatever that is. Make sure you leave as much as possible so you set them up for success, because ultimately, and whatever your impressions are of the institution that you're leaving, whether it's positive or not so positive, you want the best for that department. All of the places I've worked, I've invested so much time and energy and love into that department that I want the best for them, whether that's with me or without me. So I think that's always important to do. Another thing that I've always been very intentional with is sharing it personally with students. The students that I work directly with or closely with, they tend to receive messages of staff coming and going differently than us as professional staff who may be more used to it, as we know that student affairs professionals transition in and out of positions fairly regularly. That's different for a student. You are maybe the only person that they've interacted with in their careers. So don't forget about them and making sure you're making some time to have some of those conversations to explain why and as appropriately, of course, and to help them feel like it isn't about them and to show them that they're still valued once you do transition out of your position. So that's an important piece, at least for me to remember. And Eric just alluded to this as well, is just being able to let go. We have invested so much of our time and energy into the direction of the department, but really being able to say it's time for someone else's new vision to be there. And it may not be the same of what you thought it should be, but being able to let that go and move on to your next experience and make that your next best experience.
Thank you all. We do have some opportunity for some additional questions, and I do have some. First, from Matthew, I'm currently in a position where I'm working basically 2 positions during a vacancy. I know I'm ready to find my next position, and I have already had conversations with my supervisor that I am ready to leave, but I am delaying my search process until this vacancy gets filled or TPE comes around. Is this wise?
I'll go ahead and jump in and start. I guess I would answer the question with a question, which I acknowledge can be annoying, but is that arrangement working for both you and the institution? And so, I think that in student affairs, we're so good at taking care of everyone else. And I think for there to be balance, not only in us feeling good about the decisions and sacrifices we make, we need to also consider how that works for us. So that would be my question that I would ask.
I also think from a standpoint of there's never the right time to start. So I don't know if I've never thought that delaying it or putting it off or waiting for a certain time to start, like the TPE rolls around, because things never happen in the time frame that I wish or hope or plan or desire them to happen. So I usually tell people when it's time, you start looking, and if it's a conversation that you feel good that you can have with your supervisor, then have it. But I always try to stay away from giving timelines. Like I won't leave until here, or I won't start looking until this point or that, or because if you're talking about it, you're clearly ready to do it, and if you wait, you never end up. I find you rarely ever end up meeting that timeline.
All right. Next question is from Jordan. Is it okay to leave because of being unable to live off, and being open with that, and that being the reason for leaving? So I'm thinking this is probably a live-on position, and this person's ready to move off campus. Is that enough of a reason to seek a new position?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I have not personally worked in residential life myself, but I think one of the things that people don't give enough emphasis to in your happiness is your personal living situation, and whether that's your city or living in a residence hall or your environment or whatever that is. You have to be satisfied inside of work and outside of work. And if you don't consider that, and for you it seems like, Jordan, that's living on versus off campus, if you don't consider that, then you aren't able to give your 100% at work, if that's something that's really holding you back or it's really bothering you. So absolutely, that's something for you to consider if that's not helping you be successful at work.
As the housing guy on the call, I will say that I agree with that, but we've also had a clarification from the asker, so I'll put that and interject that now. The clarification was it wasn't about living off campus, it was about living off the paycheck, so it appears that maybe the pay is not enough to live off of. Would that change anybody's response?
No, I think from my perspective, you need to figure out what your needs are, and to echo, what Tina said, figure out what those pieces are that make you happy, what your values are, what you need for the quality of life that you want to have. And I know it's uncomfortable for people to talk about money, but if you're not positioned in a way for you to have the quality of life that you want, then I absolutely think it's reasonable to start exploring other opportunities.
I think something that I'd add to that, though, is being very realistic about it as well. I think all of us very much know that you don't join the field of higher education to become a billionaire. So I think also being, like I said, realistic about your expectations, doing your research around, job classifications at your institution and the region that you live in, all of those different things to make sure you're just being reasonable about it if a career in student affairs is what you're looking at.
Okay. Our next question, do you think years at the institution matters? So how many years you've spent at an institution? If so, what is a good number to stay at an institution before you leave?
I don't think years matter in the sense of that's a reason for leaving or for staying. We get that all the time. We get people that have been like someplace for 2 years and they're miserable and it's not a good fit. I mean, we talk about fit all the time especially when you're looking at colleges, right? You just know when it's a good fit. Sometimes it's not a good fit, and then people will say, well, if I leave now, I only have 2 years, and does that look like I'm jumping? And I was like, but if they think that, they won't hire you. If they need somebody and they want to hire you, everybody's been in these situations where sometimes it's not a good fit. But at the same respect, I don't think you should stay just because you feel like, well, I swore that I would stay for 5 years and it's only 4.5, or it's only 4, or I'm a director, I should be here for 7 or 8 years. You should go on all the other things that we talked about, factoring in your life plan, where you are, your family, opportunities, and then being honest with the institution and with yourself. That's more important than years.
I definitely agree. I think, we heard a lot at least in our generation, of that there was a specific timeline. It's that 3 to 5 years, and if if you leave a job before 3 years, it's a major issue. I don't believe that, and I agree with everything that Eric said. And thinking back to what we shared as the different things to consider, I think is really important. The only exception I would say to that is if I see a resume and someone has 7 jobs that they held for less than a year at a time, I will be honest that raises a question for me. So can it happen once or twice? Absolutely. If that is the pattern of your career where you don't stay at a place longer than a year, then that would raise a question for me.
All right, thank you. I think much of the responses kind of addressed the beginning of this next question, so I will scoot to the back part of the question. And this question comes from Rachel, much of which you already addressed, but the last part of the question is, how unhappy in your work is too unhappy? So you've kind of addressed issues about how long maybe someone should need to be in a position, what's an appropriate time, but if you're unhappy, how unhappy in your work is too unhappy?
That's an interesting question. How unhappy is too much? I mean, I think you've got to determine if there are more cons to your day than there are pros, right? If you are no longer enjoying getting up and going to work, yes, we all have bad days or days that you just don't want to get out of bed. That's probably pretty normal. But if it's happening more often than not, then you're dreading to go to work. There may be something to consider there, right? If you feel like you have lost those things that are really important to you, the things that you say that are your philosophy and your values and the things that we've kind of talked about a little bit already, and those are completely compromised and you feel like you are compromising your own professional and personal character, I think those are some things. At least for me, when I've been in a situation, I had gotten to a point where I was just coming in to do a job. It wasn't fulfilling my passion and what gets me going in student affairs, right? So I think that's something for you to decide, but maybe hopefully I shared a few things to consider as you're going through that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And then I would also add is, how is your unhappiness impacting your colleagues, your students, and the organization as a whole?
Absolutely.
I would also say that when you ask that question, where your colleagues and your students might not always be super honest with you about how you are feeling or acting, you can surely turn to family and friends, especially in the field, and they will notice a difference in you, from personality to depression to you've changed and you're different, you're not as excited. I mean, so talk to those people around you who know you well, and people at the institution that you trust, that will give you honest feedback of how you've changed or not changed.
Well, very good points. To kind of twist that, to try and address another question that's come through, you've addressed how your own personal assessments and how you might decide to leave, but kind of going on what Anne-Marie shared earlier, how would you maybe best then articulate the reasons why you are leaving, or what would be the most appropriate way if the space is not a fit, if the office culture, if the institutional dynamic, if you've even only been there for just maybe within the year, but I have to leave, this is not a good fit. What is the best way to communicate that, and the most professional way to communicate that, both in your materials and maybe even potentially if you get an opportunity to do an interview?
We're all so excited to answer this question. So I think for me, because that probably happened in my most recent transition, I think it was about being honest, and not just being honest with the fit, but being honest with the institution. I institutions all have positives and negatives. And I think the important thing is when you get asked that question, you can get out of that question fairly quickly. Don't dwell on it. Don't talk a lot about the institution. I think it's important to say, listen, the institution is fantastic, dynamic. I've had a great opportunities they provided me at the institution. Just right now in my life, I feel like for whether it's for family, personal, or if it's just fit of the institution, just for right now, I think for some of the directions that I want to go in professionally, that your institution, and that's where you bring it back to the job, your institution provides me a better opportunity and provides me something that I think is a better fit for me right now. I think it's to be honest, but not to dwell on that question too much, and certainly not to dwell on the other institution. Turn it quickly onto what you are excited about with the job and what the new job offers.
Chris, the only reason I hesitated when you asked the question was because my mind went back to a very specific phone interview that I was chair of a search for a department in student affairs, and we were all sitting around a phone, and we couldn't get a candidate to move on from bashing the institution, and it was a level of discomfort. And so I'd like to go back to what Tina had talked about is, identifying, what you've learned from that institution, or, because we can learn lessons from positive and challenging situations. So, being able to frame that in an affirmative way, as you reflect on the situation that you're in. And I think the biggest piece is finding a way to be able to separate the emotion. I think when I've seen folks talk about it in a way that has been effective, they've intellectualized it, and I think when it's become uncomfortable in an interview session is when it's so over-emotionalized, you can't figure out what the candidate learned from the situation. And to me, that's what I would like to know as a potential employer.
That's a great response. Thank you. Just a few more before we conclude for the afternoon. How do you go about asking for funding for a conference that is outside of your spectrum of work? For example, I'm in residence life and I'm looking to transition to conduct or law. How can I best request with the understanding that I am looking? So basically, I'm looking to go get some professional development, which is the flag that says I'm looking for a job and it's not in this side of the field.
I don't know if there is an easy answer for that, except for going back to, I believe Eric just said this, is just you have to at some point just be honest, right? And let your supervisor know that here are the goals that I have for my career. Here are the steps that I've identified. Here's my plan for my career, the steps that I need to take to get there. And in order to do that, I need to do X, Y, and Z for those professional development opportunities. My guess is, my hope is that you have a very supportive supervisor that wants the best for you professionally and wants to help you get to where you are hoping to go in your career, and will be supportive of that. At least I think I would be if one of my staff members came to me and said that to me. So whether you get that response or not, I don't know, but I think really the only way to do that is to just be honest about it and just let them know what your career path is.
I think it's also that we are all managing tight budgets. So I think I'm going into it saying, is there an opportunity to split costs? Like if you can pay for the registration, I can do travel, or I'm going to split room with somebody or something like that, as well as being able to justify, because this is institutional funds, how is this going to, I know how it's going to benefit you, but what can you bring back? There's always something you can bring back specifically from the conference agenda that is going to benefit the institution, the students, the division. So to clearly articulate, like I know this is out of scope a little bit, but I want to get further experience in this to help me in my professional career. But I think these facets I can really bring back. These particular presentations are going to be useful to us, and I will have an opportunity to come back and and share that with other people, as well as an opportunity to maybe share some costs, so it's not a full ride, provides that understanding to your supervisor. Again, being honest, but that you know that this is a reach, and you know that money is scarce.
I want to continue the line of thinking that Eric's talking about, and I think sometimes we underestimate the connection of our work to other functional components of student affairs. And so I know on our campus we're talking daily about collaborations and partnership and innovation. So I wouldn't so quickly draw a disconnection between your current work and work in a different area of student affairs. So that's one thing I'd keep in mind. So my other comment is, I acknowledge will potentially be unpopular, but I think that we need to stop thinking about our professional development as only our institution's responsibility. One of the things that I've done, and I encourage my folks to do also, because I think we have, ever-changing environments. There's been plenty of campuses that I've been on or that colleagues have been on where there's been a travel freeze or folks are unable to travel. But I think we should consider our professional development also as our responsibility and start a fund and keep some money aside and invest in yourself also.
Absolutely, absolutely. The final question before we end today, the question the participant is asking, what if the reason to leave is potentially because the spouse or partner wants to leave? Not them, they like the institution, they maybe even are enjoying their position, but their spouse or partner, their family life is interfering. How do we approach a supervisor about that? I think each of you have hit on that to some degree already today.
I think more supervisors than you can imagine, particularly that have relationships, have gone through that. And if your home life is not happy for whatever reason, it's going to affect you at work, and every supervisor knows that. And I think I would like to believe that the supervisors out there, I know the three of us would, are going to be sensitive to that and are going to understand that this happens.
I think the other message I would share, and this, I don't know if it, it's kind of maybe a little, it sounds harsh, but I don't mean it to be harsh, of we're all replaceable. And we all leave for different reasons, but the reality is the department will go on. We'll find someone new. Even when I've left places, I have to get to the point where it'll be okay. They'll be okay. They'll find someone to replace me. They'll find someone to take over what I've done, and they'll continue on. The department's not going to crash down around just because I've left. And so I think being respectful of your process, doing it well, all the great things we've talked about, and just like Eric said, is that you have your family that is that needs to be happy as well, and so we all leave for different reasons. So I don't mean that to be harsh, but being okay with just being upfront of this isn't working for us, and we may need to make a different decision.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the participants for submitting some very important questions as well. Just to kind of conclude, we do have, like I mentioned before, a fantastic series of webinars offered prior to our on-site experience in March that you'll see there on the left of your screen. Please feel free to continue to come back if any of those apply to you, or that you feel like you might get something worthwhile out of it as you prepare to facilitate and conduct your search. We believe it's pretty comprehensive and hope that we will be able to touch as many potential candidates at TPE and even employers as possible. Registration is now available and open. If you're a candidate and you anticipate going to TPE to conduct your search, you can go ahead and go online and set up your account and your profile and get prepared to start seeing posts. The posts are starting to come at a quicker pace already. I would anticipate that will, well, I not only anticipate, I know that will continue to actually expand and expand and expand over the next couple of months. If there's anything that we can do at TPE to help you in your process, whether it be through these webinars or direct contact with the committee, please do not hesitate to let us know. I again want to take the opportunity to thank our wonderful panelists today for taking their time and sharing their experience and their wisdom from their own experience with each of us today. Again, thank you again, and please let your colleagues know who are unable to join us that this will be posted on our YouTube channel so we can share it further. After that, this is the conclusion for today's webinar. Thank you all very much and have a fantastic Thursday.